Right then, colleagues, welcome to the meeting, and can I welcome those people at the back there that have come along to listen. So I'll open the meeting, and the first item is attendance. Apologies, and the second one is apologies for Lewis Jones. The third one is declarations of interests. Linda, do you want to take us through that?
Thank you, Richard, as well. Morning, everyone. Yes, I've had some discussions, as usual, with members, and there are some interests that need to be declared. On item 10, Councillor Richard Clark, because he's a community councillor at Croeso Ceiliog in Llanarafon, he will have a prejudicial interest in the proposed lease because of the links of the community council with the partnership and their likely involvement in being a tenant. So that will mean, Councillor Clark, that you will not take part and you will leave the chamber. Then on item 11, to do with the pension regulations, of course we have some members who either contribute or have close associates who are recipients. And I think these are Councillor Gwenara Clark. I think you're a contributor and your husband is a recipient. And then there's Councillor Ewell, you're a recipient of a pension. And again, Councillor Richard Clark, I think you contribute, and I think you may now have an interest in relation to your mother, who is a recipient as well, that you would want to be noted. They're all just personal interests. You can remain and take part. Other than that, members, any queries on interests I can deal with as we go along.
I don't know whether it's appropriate, but obviously I've got a daughter who contributes to it as well.
You can declare that if you would define your daughter as a close personal associate, which I should imagine you would, Councillor Cunningham. Yes, indeed. Okay, I'll also, that would be noted as well.
And I've got a son.
A son who contributes. So there are two more interests that we will catch in relation to that item. Thank you, members.
On now to item 4, which is the minutes of the 19th of May. And I'll take you through them. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10. That's it. Somebody move the true record? Oh. All agreed? Sure. Thanks so much. On now to item 5, which is the minutes of the 10th of June. I'll take you through those. Page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, page 16, page 17. All agreed those minutes, please show. Or somebody move the true record? John, all agreed? Thanks for that. On now then to action sheet, the 8th of July, which is the Chief Executive.
Just there for information, Leader, unless there's any questions. Any
questions of the Chief Executive? If not, we're on to item 7, which is the footpath at Tonawenned, and this is Cat Thomas, who've obviously been on holiday.
Indeed. That's all right, no problem. Okay. The purpose of the report then is to consider a proposal for making a definitive map modification order under Section 53 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. The key messages for members to note is the application has been made for an order to register the public footpath under shown in the map as appendix, and the application is supported by 31 evidence forms, but there has been 2 objections. So the background to this really is on the 15th of March an application was put in by Mrs Simmons to register the footpath at St Luke's. The application was supported by 31 evidence forms, which spans from 1960 to 2012. But during pre-consultation, 2 objections from our highways inspector was lodged. The objections really consisted around health and safety, that he felt that the pedestrians putting themselves at risk and potentially, accident occurring on the highway. And his recommendation remains that it stays closed and that it doesn't become a highway.
Our valuation has no material evidence to the contrary of the 31 evidence forms and therefore feels it has been there since 1960. And we have to explain that safety cannot be considered whilst looking at the registration of the footpath. The test, if you like, is that it has to be there for 20 years of proof of. So in terms of policy, the Council has a statutory duty to continually update the definitive map and statement of public rights of ways. And legally, of course, the Wildlife and Countryside Act places a duty upon the Council as surveying authority to keep the definitive map updated. The legal test for the footpath, as I just mentioned, is 20 years uninterrupted. But evidence, this has come forth because of the highway blocking it up, putting a fence there and some blocking it up with mud, the complaint has come in and an application has been put forward. So we blocked it off, Torvine blocked it off, if you like, for health and safety reasons. The modification order does not create or alter a public right-of-way, it adds to the definitive map. With records, public right-of-way, modification orders are not concerned with the suitability and use of the alleged rights, only if the right exists. If there is a question of whether the path is suitable for a legal status or that the way is undesirable for any reason, then other procedures exist to extinguish, divert or regulate the use. In this instance, on balance of probability, there is a strong evidence that a public footpath exists from St Luke's Road to the rear of Newlands Court. The objections on the grounds of safety are not a consideration when assessing a public right-of-way does or does not exist. So in terms of finance, if the Council decide not to make the order, the applicant may appeal to the Planning Inspectorate of the Welsh Government and ask that the matter is decided by the Planning Inspectorate. If this went to public inquiry, the Council will have to bear its own costs, and if we were unsuccessful, we would have to bear the costs of the applicant. The cost of reinstating the steps are around £8,000, so it does come at a cost in terms of putting it accessible. The risks are not making the order is that the applicant may appeal to the Planning Inspectorate, and the risk of making the order is that any of the original objectors may lodge a further objection to the order, which, if unresolved, will also result in going to the Planning Inspectorate. So the measures of success, the Council has a statutory duty to continually update the definitive map and statement of public rights of way whilst protecting the public rights of access. So in conclusion, there has been an application to add a public footpath to the definitive map and statement of rights of way between St Luke's, and there has been 2 objections to the proposed route. But on balance, the probability there is a strong user evidence that a public footpath exists in the line indicated on the evidence forms. This is highlighted in the map in Appendix A. A right of objection would exist if the order were made, and there would be a right of appeal for the applicant in the event of refusal. If the order was made and no objections are received during the statutory advertising period, the Council will confirm the order as unopposed. If objections are received and not withdrawn, the order or objection are submitted to the Planning Inspectorate for Welsh Government to decide. So recommendations to the Council are, would the Council approve the application to register the route between St Luke's Road and the rear of Newlands Court, and grant approval to confirm the order, provided no objections are received within 42 days from the publication of the notice.
Thank you for that, Kath. John, I mean, it's a sensible thing, I think, that you're recommending.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chair. You'll recall that I think this raised its head about 2 years ago, and Councillor Barry Taylor was very vociferous on the issue about this particular footpath. It's in the ownership of the council, but it's been an informal desire line by residents for, I think, it's well in excess of 20 years. It was closed up at the time because of what officers consider to be safety issues, where the footpath comes straight out onto the main road. But as Kath have said, that is not a consideration when you're determining whether you register as a footpath. So I think we're behind the 8 ball on this. I think you've got to find £8,000 to do it up and make it accessible. And of course, we'll get the ongoing costs. Kath thinks she can find that money from maybe some contributions from other sources. But it's something that we're going to have to do, because if it does go to inspectorate, we'll probably lose it anyway. And I think it's been established over the years that it's... and I understand, although it's been blocked off now at this moment in time, rather badly, I understand the residents are still using it. And so I think we have to, make the best of a bad job and try and do something for them, albeit, as it says in the report, the safety, unfortunately, is not a consideration when you're determining this. So I would support the report and the recommendation, Chair.
Yeah, and I would do as well, because they've been using it for so long. The alternative is a walk all the way round, and I think often members of the community take a desire on as their sensible approach. All agree with the recommendations, please show. Thanks very much. Thank you, Kath. On now then to item 8, which is civil collaborative.
The purpose of this report is to outline the developments taken so far in the collaboration with SUIC around fostering. I'm not going to go into all the detail in the report, probably just take you through some of the highlights and take any questions as you like. Members will be aware that the provision of foster care is a very important role in the community, and the children who can't live in their own homes live with foster carers. We do very well in Torvine in terms of recruiting foster carers. We currently have 198 foster families. 150 children placed in 98 families, which is a high proportion, 42 in independent placements. The work that's going on in SUIC really is around looking at better ways of recruiting and sort of faster ways, if you like, taking a more business-like approach, which the independent agencies are doing. We think that we may lose across the region a number of foster carers in terms of the timeliness of us getting an application or an inquiry to foster to the actual time getting somebody out. So we think by working in the collaboration, if we're unable to go, another authority may be able to go and give that initial information. Also in terms of taking people through the process of the programme, parenting programme. If we weren't running one and another authority was running one, we could put our foster carers or potential foster care through that. So it's right, looking at efficiencies. We're also aware that a number of our foster carers are, if you like, ageing, many around the 55 age group. It doesn't feel particularly old, but there you go. And we need to try and recruit some younger foster carers. You'll note in the report as well, though, that the difference in the costs is quite significant. The average cost of an in-house placement around £380 per week, and the independent sector £736. So it's a massive gap, really. As I said, we do quite well in Torvine. Now, in moving further into this collaboration or looking at it, we're also very mindful that we do okay in Torvine, and we wouldn't want to be giving our foster carers to anyone else in the region, and I think we've got to be very clear about that. And any efforts we've made in this area before have never really gone anywhere because of that very issue. People were very protective around their own people. And in terms of allowances, when we've said we should all develop the same allowance, people then just put them up slightly to try and attract people. So it's not perhaps as easy as it seems. But we think it's worth doing, and I think the recommendation is that we should do some further work within the collaboration to promote best practice and to ensure that we recruit more foster carers.
Thank you for that, Keith. Richard?
I think I've said before, when it comes to collaboration, the department does all that it can. But as Keith alluded to there, it's not collaboration for collaboration's sake. Whereas we're happy to enter into a pool for the economies of scales, the officers will keep their eye on it and see if it affects our long tradition, even when it was Gwent County Council, of having our own indigenous foster families. Keith skipped over the figures, but I think it's worth repeating that we have 98 foster families looking after 150 of our children, as opposed to 42 children being looked looked after by Independent Fostering Association, which in themselves are a higher cost. I think we will benefit from the collaboration in terms of, as Keith explained, getting out there in the first instance, but there is the risk of our Indigenous foster families going out to other areas, but I'm reassured by the officers that we will keep our eye on this and go forward if it suits Torfaen, but in the spirit as the department always does, in collaboration.
Right, thanks for that. Anybody else want? Anthony?
Just to welcome that, and I think it's speaking to other councils. I think the work that's done in Torfaen around that is leading in the sector and does both save money and ensure a good deal for the children that need to be placed in foster care. I think it's worth, as a cabinet, us reaffirming our support for foster carers locally. I met with one in my ward recently, and they do brilliant work helping take in and give a safe and caring environment for some very vulnerable young people. And the work they do is fantastic and should be commended.
Right, thanks for that. Anybody else? I want to echo those sentiments as well. I think I know personally 3 different foster parents, and I've known them over years, and I've watched children grow up in their care, and they really do a fantastic job. All agree with the report, recommendations? Thanks. Please show. Thank you. On to item 9 now. And Keith, you're doing this? Who's doing this?
No, I am.
Good.
All right. Just got in the paper. I had it down right from 10, sorry.
All right. Over to you, Keith. All right. We believe you.
The purpose of this report is to ask Cabinet to approve the award of the Dementia Day Services contract. As you'll see from the report, we've been through a tender process. 3 companies were successful from the first round and went through to the second round. The scoring was done as ever in the first time based on price and quality, and the selection questionnaire that they put in. And stage 2 was based on an interview and a presentation. The company that came out, or the preferred company that came out, was Company 2, but all 3 of the companies could actually fulfil the needs of the contract. So what we're asking Cabinet today is to agree the award of the contract to Company 2, but to allow the others to remain in reserve should Company 2 not take it forward. Within the tender, we did ask people to tender with accommodation for the day services. Nobody did tender for that. So it will be down to the department to source appropriate accommodation. The accommodation we currently use, whilst it is satisfactory, isn't ideal, so we would have looked to move it anyway. It's 1 large room based at Cumbrawn House, and actually for people with dementia, they need more space. The intention is also to move this service to a 7-day service, and I note in the report, or you'll note in the report, we do think there will be a slight increase in expenditure of about 32,000. We think that money will be saved through the savings we make for the people who attend those days who would otherwise be having other sorts of care, or the net increase will be fairly marginal. But the increase to the service and the support to carers is worth the investment. So it's a key plank of our sort of support to carers, really. So I'm just asking you to approve that that we award the tender to Company 2, who I don't know who they are, but that we keep 1 and 3 in reserve.
All right, thanks for that. Rich?
I think this complies with the new Act and the focus on carers, and I think Keith raises a very important point on it becoming a 7-day service. People don't stop needing a service on a Friday afternoon just because it's not provided on the weekend. So I think it's important that we are forward looking and filling in with the NHS, who are going to 7 days a week. Again, as I said, people don't stop needing a service, carers don't stop needing the respite, and the service users don't stop the need for it. So I think it's forward and future proof. So I support it and wholeheartedly recommend members do as well.
Any members want to make a comment? If not, all agree.
Just a comment, if I could, and it's nothing to do with my other case that I've been speaking to you about, but I do have another family member who's got a major problem. She's at home, major problem with memory loss because of dementia. She's supposed to go to the memory clinic, but she forgets. And that's not a joke, that is true. I'm just wondering what sort of in-house facilities are available for people who are not extremely bad, but, because of her problem. And there must be a lot of people like that who need some at-home type of support on occasion, not all the time.
Well, it's not in-house. The commission provision is this day service where people can go, and it's very well attended and well supported. But also, when we train our home carers or any staff who go into people, they are trained to work with people like this, and will use certain techniques to prompt people to do certain things, like take medication, and that's a very key thing that we do now. And we work with the other home care agencies that we commission as well, because forgetting to take your medication is very common when you're. But there are also other things now coming in, electronic devices where pills are automatically dispensed and a little buzzer goes off and things. But it depends on the severity of the condition. But there are lots of things happening now. But mainly, it's the in-house thing would mainly be our home care team that still go into people.
Anybody else? If not, all agree with the report? Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Keith. On now to item 10, which is Woodland Roads. I think Richard got to leave. Dave. Dave Congreve.
Thank you, leader colleagues. This is just a report that's got two purposes mainly. First purpose is to ask you to enter or to give authority to enter into a lease at Woodland Road Sports and Social Centre for the purposes set out in the report. And the second purpose really is to ask that if you resolve to enter into a lease, that you delegate authority for the detail of that lease to be negotiated between the executive member and the assistant Chief Executive resources in terms of the detail of the lease, and for that to be subject to my satisfaction in terms of the detail of the ongoing management arrangements that we'll put in place to support that lease. If I just take you through some of the key messages by way of background, and then I think we can move to the recommendations and take any questions. Key messages are on page 44 of the report, which is in front of you. Essentially, you'll recall that the transfer of these operational arrangements, the main driver for these is part of the Council's approved budget strategy. We have to save money on a whole range of services, and this is one of the services that members elected to look at in terms of a different service model that would make us a revenue saving. So that's the key background. The work to progress that transfer has been going on since that resolution was made as part of the Council's budget strategy, and there are four sort of areas of related work that we've been working with the new organisation and other parties on, and most of those are progressing very satisfactorily. I've already mentioned the third bullet point, really, which is around the fact that this report, third and fourth bullet point, really, if you decide to grant a lease, then this report is simply granting the authority to do so, and the detailed work around that will be subject to other arrangements involving the executive member and myself and Nigel as well. The main purpose of the lease, as well as saving us money, is the last bullet point on page 44, which is really to ensure that the new organisation has the ability to enter into financial arrangement or grant funding arrangements, or grant seeking arrangements, I should say, because we don't know whether they'll be successful, grant seeking arrangements that in turn will bring money into the facility in a way in which the council could not directly do that. Over the page at the top of page 45, I think there are just a couple of other things I should mention. The new organisation that's being created will be, we anticipate, subject to registration with the Charities Commission, which should give us all safeguards around their governance arrangements and their suitability for ongoing management of the organisation. Obviously, as the executive member for Health, Social Care and Wellbeing, as a member of the Community Council, as has been mentioned, he's not here, but the Community Council have made significant progress in backing this new organisation in lots of different ways and supporting it, so I know that they're fully behind the transfer. And obviously, I think one of the reasons that they want to do that is to protect the asset for the benefit of their local community members. There's quite a bit more background information in the report, but I think that's essentially the reason the report's in front of you. And if I then take you to the recommendations on page 49, which are twofold, that Cabinet agrees in principle to the transfer of management responsibilities and, more importantly, the issuing of a long lease, 21 years, on the buildings identified in the attached plan to Woodland Road Community Trust, the new management organisation on the basis set out in this report, and secondly, delegates authority to the executive member for resources in consultation with the assistant to chief executive resources to agree the final terms of the lease. So that's the detail of the leasehold arrangements between the two parties, and that will be subject to the satisfaction of myself that all of the relevant matters around governance, financial arrangements and operational responsibilities have been resolved as well. So I'll end there, Leader.
Right, thanks for that, Dave. Any comments? John?
Yeah, but this organisation is somewhat different, isn't it, to a local community association? And I know that we've done it with one particular organisation in Cwmbran, which seems to be very, very successful, well, from what I've seen of it. My concern about this organisation, because you hear the talk around town, of course, is about the business case for its sustainability. Now, who takes that on board? Is it us who are going to hand the lease over, or is it the Charities Commission who have to register as a charity? Because it worries me that we can pass leases over and they haven't got a business case at all to make it sustainable. I just wonder who takes that on board?
Sorry, the answer to that question is both of us to some extent. Before it's transferred, the reason that we've put that caveat in that I would want to look at that business case and assure myself and others on your behalf, really, that the business plan is as sustainable as possible. So that's the responsibility that we will take before transfer. As soon as the transfer is made, then that responsibility for operating and managing that site becomes the responsibility of the new organisation. So again, part of the assurance work that we will do is around the suitability of the governance arrangements, but effectively the Charities Commission will police that going forward. I think the context for us is that the building isn't sustainable from the council's point of view in its own right, so there is, clearly we've got issues to work through, but the reason for the transfer is as we've set out. We've got other priorities as a council that we wish to direct that £60,000 to £70,000 a year towards.
I understand, and we want it to succeed. But my concern is that if 6 to 8 months down the road it doesn't succeed, then we are back in, back to square one, as it were, and knowing what to do with the facilities. I'm just concerned about the business case.
Well, all I can say, Councillor Cunningham, is that we will have a good look at that business case, and the context for it is it will probably be more sustainable than resources that we're putting in there.
And the backstop is it'll come back to us if it goes pear-shaped?
Well, that will depend on the discussions in terms of the detail of the lease that you're delegating to the executive member and ourselves. I think one of the issues for all of us really is that this is a set of services that are going to be under significant pressure in the future. And I just keep reiterating the point that the reason for this transfer is that we need to make savings on this part of the council's budget.
Anybody else? If not, all agree with the recommendation. Sure. Thanks very much for that. Thank you, dear. 11, which is employer pension discretion, and this has been done by Graham Russell.
Good morning, members. The report this morning distinguishes between two roles that Torvine has in respect of pensions. One is as the administering authority for the fund, the Greater Gwent Fund within South East Wales. But those functions are delegated through to the Pensions Committee. Separately to that, you have your role as an employer within the pension fund. And under the pension fund regulations, you are obliged to consider and put in place certain written policies. So what this report deals with is two things. For completeness, it just reminds you of the existing policies that you already have as they relate to the pension fund. But secondly, what it does is to put in place suggested new policies which we are required to do under regulations and have in a written format. We have within Torvine about 3,000 members of staff who are within the local government pension scheme. And so what we consider and put in place here is important within that context because it does affect potentially a number of staff as they approach pension age. The report itself is relatively brief. It's 5 or 6 pages. There is a large appendix which sets out in more detail the various discretions that are already in operation. And indeed, there are only 7 actual new discretions that you're being asked to look at today. Those 7 are set out within paragraph 6 of the report. And the various discretions we've got here, some we are obliged to have a published policy. Some do not require a published policy, but they have been included within the appendix for completeness. And then also there are some related pensions matters which aren't governed by the precise pension regulations relating to things like redundancy and severance, but we still require a written policy for those, and they are included for completeness. So the key part of the report, as I say, is paragraph 6, and this is where there are 7 new written policy discretions set out. Some of them are simply a refresh of previous legislative regimes, and the reason they're being brought forward now is because of the introduction of the new local government pension scheme in April of 2014. So those regulations, together with some transitional regulations, required us to introduce new discretions. And they're set out on pages 54 to 56 of your agenda. And it wasn't my intention to go through them in detail. The key essence around them is, one is about whether members of the scheme are allowed to buy additional service, and there is a discretion proposed there which indicates that members could not buy just additional service, but they can buy back lost service if, for example, there's industrial action or an adoption or maternity leave or something like that. They could buy back lost service in those situations. There is also a discretion around flexible retirement and whether the council wishes to continue with that scheme. We do already have a scheme, and this is one of these legislative refresh areas that I referred to. So what is proposed is a continuation of what we already have in place around flexible retirement. And that also applies equally to some of the areas where there is an option, if somebody retires early, that we can reduce their pension slightly because it's having to be paid over a longer period of time. And then there is the issue for us is whether to apply that actuarial value reduction or whether to waive any reduction and give them full enhanced entitlement, which would actually cost us a little bit more. There's also issues around what is called the 85-year rule, and that replaces a discretion that we used to have around employer consent, where an individual who was over the age of 55 could ask if they could be allowed to go, and the employer could consider that. And we're keeping options open there in the discretion, where we're talking about making it necessary upon a clear financial case and business case, but we are keeping options open according to the individual circumstances, and that is a theme running through this. And then there are other instances of where we have a choice of whether to apply actuarial reductions or not. There's also one around adding extra levels of service, and we're suggesting that that is not carried forward. The whole point about these is that we've tried to adopt an approach which is supportive both to managing the workforce but also supporting individual circumstances for employees approaching retirement age. We've also had to be cost conscious in terms of any discretionary policies that are put in place. The two final points I would make is that within the regulations we do have to have regard to making sure that these policies are workable and practical, and we have to ensure that they are not so generous as to, and the way it's phrased is, could lead to a serious loss of confidence in the way this part of the pension is administered. To do that, what we've done is to consult directly with the pensions manager, who is obviously in a position to know what other employers within the fund have done and what they've adopted. And our proposals here are consistent and are reasonable within that context. The final point I would make is that we have engaged with the trade unions, and they are broadly supportive and comfortable of what is contained within this report. They have seen the full report. The only final point I would add there is that there is ongoing clarification around some of these regulations which are very new. And the unions have just reserved the right to continue discussion were it to be found that as a result of clarifying regulations there needed to be some sort of change in interpretation. We have to bring this report forward now, as we are required to produce this and publish this within a fixed time scale from the introduction of the regulations. So the report deals with just 7 new written arrangements, trying to balance practicality and reasonableness with cost, and you are asked to note the existing arrangements, to approve the new discretions, and if you were to approve it, then these would be published and reviewed periodically.
All right, thank you, Graham. Hunt, do you want to say anything? No. Any comments members want to make? If not, all agree with the report. Be sure. Thanks very much. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Leader. Let's just get the report up on the screen. Okay, this is the first report I brought on financial planning for 2015-16 to 2017-18, and obviously it builds on the medium-term financial plan that was agreed as part of the budget in March. I mean, the key messages, almost sum up the whole report, but I will quickly just go through the report. In the background, I just remind members that the current budget is a like-for-like reduction of 4%, which was significantly assisted by a number of corporate and one-off things we were able to throw into the pot to largely alleviate the Welsh Government reduction in that year. Things around the tax-based procurement and the like. Although they're in the base, they won't be there to the same level to assist going forward. So 2015-16 onwards is going to feel different to previous years in that regard. In 4.2, I bring out some of the backdrop and context. We've still got, we've got rising demand for services, rising costs for services, increased expectation, but we've also got increased, ambition from the Welsh Government, and an ambition that doesn't seem to recognise that that's coming alongside withdrawing resources. We've got increasing legislation from the Welsh Government, particularly around social care, which used to be fully funded and is no longer, fully funded, increasing complexity, increasing regulation, and increasing hypothecation. Hypothecation, of course, of itself just simply squeezes the other services that are not in the protected zone. We touched on at the last council, in terms of the forward-facing plan, that we're reducing and narrowing down our priorities as a result of the squeeze in 14-15, and I think that needs to continue as we go on, as the squeeze keeps going. I then mentioned the Wales Audit Office report that's come out and has been reasonably critical around the preparedness of local authorities in relation to medium-term financial planning. It is a little unfair in not recognising the impact of forward indications, or the lack of them, have on us, but nevertheless I think we can expect greater scrutiny and greater challenge around the robustness of the medium-term financial plan for the next 3 years. I then go on in terms of the national picture, and it really starts with the Minister's letter that came out on the 24th of June. Members will recall that the forward indications we had just 6 months ago indicated a year-on-year reduction of, expecting around 1.5%, which would have been 1.3% for us, which of itself would have been challenging. I've picked out just 3 parts of the letter and reproduced them in the report. The first is the reference to the pressures in the NHS, which I think is quite pertinent in a letter coming from local government. And it also fails to recognise, or there's no reference to social care and the preventative agenda, which all evidence suggests, if you invest in social care, you will actually help significantly to alleviate the pressures within the NHS. And then goes on to say that the current plans we've got for 14-15 of 1.5%, and there remains a possibility of further amendments, and she's suggesting we plan and look at how we respond reductions up to 4.5%, and for future years we should plan on a range of challenging scenarios. I mean, there's a clear inference within all of that that money is going to be diverted from local government and into health. And personally, I think it's a bit disappointing that the forward indications local government has had just a few months ago are changing, simply because they're an impediment to good planning. If we'd known 6 to 9 months ago that we're facing 2 years of -4%, then that does help our planning. So it's as much about the timeliness of the information as the actual quantum. I do think, though, there's little appreciation of the impact that these percentages will have on local government. The next part of the report reminds members of the medium-term financial planning assumptions, and we'd already suggested they may be worse. Instead of 1.5%, we're planning on 2.5% for 15-16. And then I've got a range of tables there that try to model some different scenarios. So in 5.4, we take the Minister's letter and show what the change would be if we went up to 4.5%. In terms of the tables for 2016 and 17 and 2017-18, they've got the wrong percentage headings on the top. They start from where the medium-term financial plan started, not 2.5%, and the final columns are at 4%, not 4.5% in those. But the numbers are all fine. And basically, what those 3 tables say is that if you assume the worst case of 4.5% and 4% for the following 2 years, we're looking at another £10 million worth of pressures, simply on the basis of the letter that we've had over the medium-term financial planning assumptions, which of itself was making the situation worse. Some other factors, we can assume that Welsh Government will want to protect schools at 1% above the block grant, which for next year would be 0.6%. We've got no information around grants, but we know a lot of them underpin core services. We don't know what other funders, such as the college, we don't know what impact that will be in future years. We don't know what's going to happen at UK level, and obviously we've got the future map of local government, which will be emerging within this period, and the cost of change. So in terms of our approach, I make the point in the first paragraph that if these percentages come to pass, we're well beyond salami slicing, we're well beyond efficiency, we're well beyond doing more for less. They will all have to be part of our approach and our solution, and the more we can yield out from efficiencies, then obviously the less the cuts we'll be in. But if these scenarios come to pass, we are going to be in this scenario of stopping some of the service offering that local government has traditionally offered. And I do make the point that local government reorganisation is not going to solve things. It's not going to solve things, certainly in the short term, because the costs will outweigh the benefits. And it's still a little way off. I mean, this is modelling up to 2017-18, so we're going to be facing that as Torfaen County Borough. There are some elements of our budget that are either very difficult to reduce or we can't reduce, and I've kept those to a minimum, but you're basically talking about the amount we pay on our debt, the amount we pay to insure our services, and the council tax reduction budget, the former council tax benefit budget, which now sits, of course, within ours. We'll obviously look to see what we can do with all of those, but we can't just simply apply simple reductions. And then the table in 6.3 is something that I know has been used by Councillor Hunt in terms of a meeting with Welsh Government, because basically what all the table in 6.3 shows is our net budget for 2014-15. The third column is those budgets I just referred to that would be either difficult to cut or reduce. It gives a revised net budget. If we then simply apply the protection we've applied in the past to schools and social care, you're left with £51 million, or just over £50 million. If you just position that against the reduction in Welsh Government funding in moving to 4.5%, that's over 16 million, which is 30% of the 50 million. Which is 10% per annum. Now, bearing in mind, in that 50 million, you've got waste, street scene, libraries, leisure, planning, enforcement. That's not simply the back office of the council. That's a lot of frontline service provision. So some thoughts then and questions. Can we protect any services in relation to the Welsh Government reduction? Should we be asking services to absorb their pressures? Where the impact of grant reductions, if they're in our priority areas, going to fall? It seems inequitable if they're in a very small area that we simply just say, well, that service area has to wash its face with the grant reductions. And should we further narrow our priority focus, which certainly regulators and the Recovery Board will certainly be encouraging us to do. So I don't think 15-16 and the following 2 years are going to look like they've been in the past. So I think we are going to be having some percentage reductions of services. I think we are going to be talking some cross-cutting areas where spend goes right across, and stopping some service offerings. And I think we have to be realistic. Our ability to manage the workforce element of that in the same way that we've done in the past is going to be much more difficult, nigh on impossible, given these scenarios. So I've already asked chief officers by the beginning of September, and for the 3 years in question, to identify what measures they would be looking at if we were just alleviating the pressures, and that includes really challenging the pressures as well. Then what would the savings measure? If it was a 2% reduction, then a further 4%, which would be 6%, then another further 4%, which would be 10%. And some services, if these scenarios come out, could well be at the 10% level. They're obviously going to produce some really, really stark choices that we will be facing, but the sensible way is to get as much information as early as we can, so that you as members can start to try to make some sense of it. And I think we've got to be serious. We're expecting those over the 3 years, so that we can see, what we're going to do in the following 2 years. I put some timescales then, and also since I wrote the report, we've obviously got a all-member seminar on the 21st of July now, around arising out of the last council around the forward-facing plan. But certainly I'll be putting some slides in as a context, because the world did shift on the 24th of June with the letter. The only two final parts of the report, it's not the primary purpose, but I'm reminding everyone that in-year discipline is important. We don't want to go into 15-16 with any overspend from 14-15, and we'll construct the budget guidelines based on what we've said in this report. So, as I said at the start, the key messages really sum it up. We've seen the forward indication shift again. We've been asked to plan for anything up to 4.5%. It's going to mean really stark choices, for all councils, and the impact these choices will have on the organisation, our service, and employment levels. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Ant.
Okay, just thank Nigel and his officers for the report. It's obviously an enjoyable job he has, coming every so often to cheer us all up with the outlook financially, and unfortunately it's not looking any better. That said, it's right that we plan ahead as much as we can. Of course, planning requires some certainty, as Nigel said, and the more certainty that we can get from Welsh Government means the more that we can plan, and the more that we can plan further ahead. Nigel drew our attention to the difference of planning for consecutive years of 4% reductions, and the longer our horizon is, and the less blockings on that horizon, the more we can do to try and plan to address the challenge. But I think it's important to say that no amount of planning can resolve figures like that without pain. There's no easy way out of this. There's no way that we can just come out with a bright ruse that's going to solve all this problem, whether that's reorganisation or anything else. So it is important that we act on the latest expectations following the Minister's letter. It's also important, of course, that we recognise the Welsh Government have got almost £2 billion less for services than they did in 2010. So this is not a situation entirely they're making. It's a situation of the making of an austerity agenda that stems right from the top in Downing Street. And I've said many times before, the level or the strength with which we object to that, unfortunately, doesn't resolve the mathematical challenge that it means it gives us. The 4.5% mentioned in the report, that the impact of that really is difficult to overstate. And I think expectations have to mirror that financial reality in terms of what services we can provide, and in terms of the Welsh Audit Office's sort of improvement agenda have been mentioned. I think we really need to make those two things marry up, because the job that we can do depends directly on the amount of money that we have. And it's worth recalling that the 11 million figure that we saved last year comes on top of 33 million over the previous 5 years. So many of the easy options, the easier options, have already been taken. Last year, I think we did well to take a number of corporate measures that halved almost the challenge to frontline services. I said at the time that those things seemed very dry, but they really were our way of trying to protect frontline services from the full impact of the cuts. But many of those measures can only be done once, like adjusting our assumed collection rate, for example. Other measures, like looking at our non-pay spend, our procurement, you get diminishing returns each time you try and do it, because obviously you've made lots of savings and it's harder to make them again year on year. So as Nigel said, I think the impact of another 4.5% is much greater as each year goes by. Nigel mentioned the figures. 4.5% is around 6 million less for us to spend on services. And I think table 6.3 in the report is very important, because it does bring that sort of home, that the reality of where that 6 million has to come from. The 168 million pounds of our entire budget is diminished by the 22 million pounds of fixed budgets, 96 million pounds schools and social care, things that we've worked very hard to try and protect. So you're left with 50 million pounds. 6 million out of that 50 million is 12% just in 1 year. If you take the 16 million over 3 years, that's 30%. And that's 30% of money that pays for refuse, 30% of money that pays for a lot of frontline services. As Nigel said before, that's not just back office money, that's not just our internal costs. That's a lot of the services that people depend on and that people build their sort of view of the council based upon. So I think that's a very hard challenge for us. And of course that presumes that other services can absorb their pressures, especially in social care. Increased demand makes absorbing their pressures extremely difficult. So I think that really sort of has to, switching over to a more political tone, that really has to maybe affect our mindset. We often talk about, in local government, sort of building on things, regenerating things, improving things. Given those figures, does the sort of the lexicon of the debate have to retreat more to how we can protect core services, how we can survive, how we can strive ever more to do things differently? There are things that have been done a certain way. Is there another way that's uncomfortable to do them, but that would provide necessary savings? I really don't think we can avoid some very difficult questions and some very difficult considerations as we go forward. The political challenge for us, of course, is not just to sort of dwell in that doom, but to see it as a challenge and to look how we respond to figures that stark, whilst doing what we all got elected to do, which wasn't to cut things, but was to provide local services, to protect the vulnerable, and to try and translate our values around the table here, our Labour values of social justice into action. The financial realities of that don't absolve us of that duty. They make it more difficult, but they make it ever more necessary. And that's the sort of the attitude with which I think we should face the challenge, but it's not going to be easy.
Right, thanks for that, Nigel. Let me just make a comment, because this table 6.3, our members will know that Councillor Anthony Hunt is the Deputy Spokesperson for Finance for the WLJ, and quite recently, within the last fortnight, we met with the Minister Leslie Griffiths to talk about the budget and what's coming down the track. And Anthony Hunt used this table quite successfully in pointing out what our issues would be as a local authority. Now, in years gone by, we've used the but we've used a method, what we used to call Council Cymru, which was to take a typical council in Wales, apply their thoughts to it, and that would give an idea in terms of what the problems were. I'm simply making the point that I want to commend Anthony Hunt for the skillful way that he used this table, which you compiled, Nigel, in a very, very substantial meeting to draw attention to the problems that was facing local authorities, and in particular our local authority. And so we are in for very difficult times. But I think we need to know that we've got a very skillful pair that is looking at the finances and trying to find our way through it. John. Anthony, you want to mention? Go on.
Just to respond to that, that's not, us trying to sort of beat the Welsh government over the head. I think it's just a case of trying to sort of shape the language of the debate. You can say take 6 million out of 170 million pounds, and it sounds sort of like you can still be in the realms of doing more with less, or just trying to be more efficient. But taking 6 million and then another 6 million and then another 6 million out of 50 million pounds. It's just an attempt to sort of shape the language of expectation and the language of what we can do around that reality.
John?
Just to make the point, Chairman, as you well know, that local government finance has never been my forte, but reading this particular report, I mean, to say that it's very worrying is an understatement. But I don't think that's the whole picture, really, Nigel, is it? Where there's lots of grant availability now, which is not available anymore. We take the LGIP, which I've got, an interest in. I mean, that is ceasing. So there's money that we used to get, or we're able to attract, that we're not going to be attracting anymore. And what really worries me about it was pleasing to note the report in the newspaper today, which you've been quoted on, where Bob Bright was featured highly. That at least the message is getting out. Unfortunately, there's not many people in this borough read the Argus or the Free Press, unfortunately. But we need to get that message out. We need to manage that message, because I don't think that our residents really understand the predicament that we are in. I mean, I had a letter the other day, quite a nasty letter actually, about our street scene services. And when you explain to these people, well, listen, it is a resource issue. This bloke told me, well, what you've got to do, he said, is apply to the Welsh Assembly for some more money. I mean, that really sums it up, doesn't it? The people just don't really understand the situation we're in. So managing the message, I think, is most important. I think the Argus may have done a bit of that, but we need to do a bit as well.
Anybody else? If not, then good report, excellent report, Nigel and Anthony. All agree the recommendation, please show. Thanks so much.
The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet approval to award the contract for the provision of banking services. In terms of background, the Council's current contract is with the Co-op Bank, but as you'll be aware, the Co-op has been experiencing considerable financial and governance difficulties. And significantly, on the 5th of November 2013, they announced by letter their intention to withdraw completely from local authority banking market. The letter explained that they would support the current contract until its end date, but would also support early termination. So based on this information and discussions with our co-op relationship manager, it was decided to undertake a full formal tendering exercise, and a tender notice was published in the OJU on the 2nd of May 2014. 2 banks submitted tenders in response to the advert. Both met the stated minimum criteria, and they then went on to be fully evaluated on the basis of 40% price, 60% quality. Tenderer 1 was the winning bank and submitted a tender for 5 years at a cost equating to £92,303. If this report is agreed today, there will follow a standstill period of 10 days, and then arrangements will be made to commence the implementation process, with the new contract starting no later than 3 months after being awarded. No significant risks have been identified, although the implementation will be complex, and good communication of the changes to the banking arrangements will be key. Cabinet's approval is therefore requested to award the contract for the provision of banking services to Tenderer 1, the winning tenderer.
Thanks for that. Any comments? Well, no comments at all? Sorry about that. All agree with the report? Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Leader. Very brief report. Members, you'll remember that you made appointments to joint committees and partnerships bodies at a previous meeting. Councillor Powell was appointed to the Education Achievement Service Board, but Cabinet hasn't appointed a deputy. So this recommends that you appoint Councillor Mary Barnett as deputy, as you did previously.
Thanks for that. You okay with that, Dave?
Yes.
All right, thanks so much. Any other comment? No? All agree with the report? Thanks so much. That concludes the meeting.